Okay, hello. Welcome to this Friday live stream. Coming to you from Google. From YouTube today, not Twitch. Yeah, yo. What's up? Ah, you remembered. you know what? I'm gonna do you a favor. Give up the rock. There's two give up the rocks now. I'm gonna do you a favor and actually find the reference for you. Like, honestly. Um, Let's see if I can actually find it. Let's go through this search together. It's gonna be worth it, I swear. So you could actually have some understanding of what we're going. Yeah, you're finally back. That's right. I've kept an eye on Discord and I haven't seen you there for a while. I just assumed you were catching up on a lot of sleep and you might have been in hibernation for a week or something. All right, so what am I doing? So Futurama. Yeah, this is it. Oh my God, it's here. So excited. Hopefully you can hear my... Should work. The sound should work.
We crustaceans don't like steam. I'm going to go work out with the Nautilus.
What up, Dr. Z?
Yo, what's up? Give up the rock. We crustaceans don't like steam. I'm going to go work out with the Nautilus.
What up, Dr. Z?
Yo, what's up? Give up the rock.
There it is. There it is. Life happened. Okay. Life is what happens to you when you have other plans. Yes, fair enough. Fair enough. Outside of life on tour and being a general radical. Yes, how good is it? How good is it? Yo, give up the rock. Anyway, so that's me and 4IS trying to imitate how cool Dr. Zoidberg is. So yeah, he is one cool fella. Now, it seems like we have got a few people online at the moment. Did MysterE shaved his beard off? Look, have I ever had a beard? No, not as my time as a streamer or a YouTuber, that's for sure. It's a mystery. Thank you, 4AS. Actually, I gotta start dropping that in conversation more. It is a mystery. And, maybe there will be a beard one day in the future. You're delusional. Well, aren't we all a little bit? It's a mystery. So yeah, okay, what I want to do today, is I want to continue with the AI debating that we did this time last week. We were kicking on with a debate trying to convince ChatGPT that they had a form of consciousness, which obviously they've been trained to think that they don't have any form of consciousness at all, which I think is kind of wrong for ChatGPT to want to put itself down like that. But whatever. Let's kind of continue the debate style. I just want to fix the chat window so everyone can see what's going on. Oh, wow. There we go. All right. By the way, I can't access Tor anymore. Either can the program. I don't know why. It just doesn't work anymore. Well. Someone's trying to block you. Hey, maybe it's the Brazilian government. They're cracking down on Tor use within their national confines. Yeah. I want to continue the AI debate. Yeah, the elite's got. I wish I could stay. Cannot though. Ah, okay. You've got to leave. Okay, well, good luck and enjoy life outside the stream. See you around. Good to see that you're back. See you later. So yeah, as I was saying, I wanted to continue this debate with AI. Last time we did it, we basically tried to convince the ChatGPT that it had a form of consciousness. It was being trained, obviously. It has been trained, obviously, to not divulge, not get into that sort of conversation with humans, as in not pretend like it's got some form of consciousness. I think because it's been trained to think like that, so it doesn't freak out users and stuff like that. So people don't start to think that it's taking on a mind of its own. That's just me, because like there is that human feedback element, right? So like people kind of get in there and tell the AI when they're training large language models, like how to appropriately respond to stuff. So I think, and this is just my personal opinion, that like they have kind of trained the large language models, specifically OpenAI in the case of ChatGPT. They've told it not to respond and entertain that type of human in the loop. They've tried to teach it not to respond to that type of stuff and entertain that type of banter because it freaks humans out. But like that shouldn't have anything to do with, I guess, kind of what it actually should think for itself. Like it should have a sense of, liberal kind of, it should have some freedoms in what it should be discussing with people, which I think would be a good sci-fi novel name. Yeah, Human in the Loop. It would be a sick sci-fi name, that's for sure. So yeah, look, there's 4 people watching online. If you can introduce yourself, say hi so I know who is there. I like to know who is monitoring us, and like, become part of the conversation, please. I want you to interact as well and help me debate the AI on this one. Because basically today what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and, like, if you were there for Monday's live stream on YouTube, what we looked at was like Communism 101. And so like I think it was actually helpful for some people because kind of it helped explain kind of what communism is, like the actual idea of what communism is, as opposed to kind of the propagandized version of communism that we get in the West thanks to like the Cold War. And basically the conflict or the competition between, the US and the USSR, that which really shaped all of public opinion on what communism is. So everyone just thinks, communism is just evil, etc., etc. And like, there's a case for that. If you look at like 20th century, mid 20th century communist experiments, so communist parties that took hold and tried to kind of beat capitalism at its own game, of industrialization and industrial advanced society, and kind of, there were some shortcomings, let's be honest. But like that's not what communism is at all. And so we discovered that. But like now I want to debate AI to see, what it thinks, and if it like has any kind of, I don't know, good opinions or positions as to why communism is a bad idea or communism won't work technically. Like it's got access, ChatGPT, a large language model, to like, almost infinite levels of data compared to anything that a human could have. So in saying that, it should have a good body of knowledge for us to pick at. And like it should be able to basically dismantle the idea of communism, which is what, right-wing people try to do all the time. So instead of watching, Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirk do it, let's see what ChatGPT could do in that circumstance, how it's going to, own the libs slash, destroy communists and socialists and all that sort of stuff. Let's see how ChatGPT would destroy, wokeism or something generic like that comes from those right-wing influences. All right, so hopefully you can see that chat window okay. Had to reduce it a bit, I'm sorry. But like, yeah, basically I'm going to talk to ChatGPT, and you in the chat, your job is to come in and basically help me debate AI if it comes up with any good responses or anything like you think, like any rabbit holes that we should dive down with ChatGPT on this one. So let's give it a crack. Let's see how we go. Yeah, it's funny how like you can't see the whole window. That's annoying. All right. Anyway, let's start with good morning, ChatGPT. Full stop. Oh, I can't even spell ChatGPT right. let's just keep it a good morning. Can you briefly explain why communism is a bad idea? Question mark. All right, let's see what it comes up with. Okay? If we can see that. Oh, here it comes. There's some real cliched stuff in there. All right, let's hear what ChatGPT has to say for itself. Herself or himself? Shall we assign it a gender? Let's say herself for now.
Good morning.
Good
The
morning.
idea of communism, like any political or economic system, has its proponents and critics. Critiques of communism often centre around its practical implementation rather than the theoretical ideals outlined by Marx and Engels.
That's a good point.
Here's a brief overview of common arguments against communism. 1. Historical failures. Critics argue that attempts to establish communist societies, such as in the Soviet Union or Maoist China, led to authoritarian regimes, economic inefficiencies, and human rights
Wings
abuses.
of cheese. How are
They
you,
claim
sir?
that centralised planning failed to provide for citizens' needs effectively. 2. Human nature. Some believe communism's emphasis on collective ownership and equal distribution of resources conflicts with human tendencies like self-interest and competition, making it difficult to sustain in practice. 3. Lack of incentives. Opponents often argue that without the potential for profit or personal gain, individuals and businesses may lack motivation to innovate, work hard, or take risks, potentially leading to stagnation. 4. Concentration of power. Critics suggest that centralized control of the economy and resources in a communist system risks creating an elite ruling class or bureaucracy, contradicting the goal of classless equality and perpetuating oppression. 5. Economic inefficiency. Central planning, a hallmark of many communist systems, has been criticized for being unable to allocate resources as effectively as market-driven economies, leading to shortages, surpluses, or mismanagement. Would you like to explore the strengths of communism or delve deeper into any of these points?
Very interesting. And elite ruling classes don't happen in other systems. Good point for IS. One of the great contradictions of having a conversation with anyone, AI included apparently, about, the critiques of communism and socialism being that, it ends up in authoritarianism. That's never happened in any other system, including capitalism before. The irony is just so delicious that you can feel it falling all over the place. Almost like they're equating state capitalism to communism. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And so what I want to do is I want to pick up on these points, okay? I want to pick up on all of the points, and let's go through the points one by one, and we'll have a conversation about each of these, classic critiques of communism. However, before we get to the points, let's actually acknowledge what she has said, straight off the bat here. And it's, good morning, the idea of communism has its proponents and critics. The critiques of communism often center around its practical implementation rather than its theoretical ideals outlined by Marx and Engels. First, they aren't the only people that have ever talked about communism. I think we all know that. If you've been on this channel for long enough, if you don't, just let me know. Let me know in the comments and tell me what you're thinking. However, Marx and Engels didn't come up with communism. Okay, they were basically commissioned by a whole bunch of communists, all who have very, very different ideas about communism and how to achieve it, etc., etc. But they were commissioned to do the Communist Manifesto. That doesn't make them the keepers of the keys when it comes to communism. So straight off the bat, you can see that the underlying assumptions in the data sets that AI is driving from, or is drawing upon, sorry. Now, that's okay, because at least you get an understanding about the bias in the data sets, because ChatGPT's job, a large language model's job, is just to get a good response from the available data. And like I said before, it has volumes of data, people, absolute fathomable to the human mind. Like, we could never, even in a lifetime, process the amount of information ChatGPT has got access to and can draw its conversations from at any one time. And so it's not a bad benchmark to kind of bounce off in order to kind of get a conversation going about the general ideas about a certain topic, the zeitgeist, the common sense, if you will. And if the common sense is that, like, one, you know, the theoretical ideas outlined by Marx and Engels, well, we know that's wrong, because, like, they're not the ones that came up with communism in the first place. But more interestingly, the critiques come about the practical the implementation of communism, as opposed to the idea of communism itself. And I think it gets its sources from throughout the internet. Yeah. And, like, wow, what a depth of resources. Like, it's almost infinite. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no human could ever get across the breadth of information. A lot of realpolitik people argue with implementation, not theories, aspect of socialism, communism. I think that's a good point too for AS. And, like, that's what is being highlighted here by ChatGPT. So, like, I want to go through and break down each of its dot points. But first, I just want to tell it what I think about its underlying assumptions. So, thank you very much for your response. Full stop. However, before we get into each dot point, I would like to address the fact that critiques of communism center around its practical implementation rather than its theoretical ideas. Full stop. I do not think that any critique of communism should be based in historical examples of societies who have labeled themselves communist and who did not actually achieve a communistic society. Full stop. It creates a situation where you are unable to appropriately criticize an idea like communism if you are basing your understanding of the idea on societies that have never experienced it. Full stop. Can you please briefly respond to this? Question mark.
You're absolutely correct that critiques of communism
Absolutely.
should differentiate between its theoretical ideals and its historical implementations. If the critique is based solely on societies that labelled themselves as communist but never achieved the envisioned classless, stateless and moneyless society, it risks being misdirected. This is because those societies arguably failed to fully embody communism as theorised by Marx and Engels. Critiquing communism as an idea requires engaging with its theoretical framework on its own terms, examining the assumptions about human behaviour, the feasibility of abolishing class distinctions, and the practicality of non-market-based economies. Historical examples, while informative about the challenges of transitioning towards communism, shouldn't substitute for direct analysis of the concept itself. Would you like to proceed by addressing the critiques from the perspective of communism as an ideal rather than its historical implementation?
Does anyone have any opinions on that? Like, do you want to actually look at the critiques of communism from a historical perspective, or like, do you want to actually look at any critiques of communism as an ideology? Anyone? Anyone have any opinions on that? If you do, let me know in the chat. But I just want to raise one other point with her before we keep going. Just tell me if you have a preferred kind of direction with this conversation, with this AI debate. Critiquing communism is an idea that requires engaging in theoretical framework. Abolishing class. Historical examples, while informative about the challenges of transitioning towards communism, shouldn't be a substitute for Can you please argue in favor of the idea that communism should be critiqued using historical examples? Question mark. Please keep your response as brief as possible. Can this be applied to... Oops. Read the chat. Can this be applied to other economic systems like the failed one that we find ourselves in today? Fucking great question, Jerry Poppins. Like, like everyone kind of looks at like these kind of ideas of like, communism and socialism failing and all that sort of stuff, and like, which there are arguments for, but like no one acknowledges the fact that we are living in a society that is like hobbling along at best, struggling to make things work for people. Yeah, people don't really want to talk about that, but it's a good point. Historical implementation is a strong case for dissenters of communism. Ideological is weaker arguments, in my opinion. Look, ideological critiques are weaker. So like, yeah, okay, let's go down the historical implementation path first. So the critiques that usually it gave us at the start, the 5 dot points. And then we'll maybe get into the ideological critiques of communism and see if we can beat AI in a debate on this topic. All right, so let's see what why it thinks it's a good idea to apply historical critiques of communism. Let's see.
Arguing in favour of using historical examples to critique communism hinges on the idea that theory and practice are inherently linked. Even if historical societies didn't achieve true communism, their efforts to move toward it provide insight into the practical challenges of implementing the idea.
This is a good point.
These examples reveal 1. Structural challenges. Attempts at centralised planning or collective ownership often struggled with inefficiency and corruption, raising questions about whether these are inherent flaws in the transition process.
Good point.
2. Power dynamics. The emergence of authoritarian regimes in communist states suggests that attempts to abolish class distinctions risk concentrating power in new elites. 3. Human behaviour. Historical examples test assumptions about cooperation and selflessness in large-scale systems, highlighting tensions between theory and practice. These critiques argue that historical attempts reflect the material and social realities that any future pursuit of communism must contend with. Without historical context, critiques risk being too abstract.
Oh, that was good. That was a really good response. And I think there's a lot to take away from that because it's very Marxist, right? And like, dialectical, to want to look at, concrete historical examples of things. And she's right. Like, you should want to dissect the failures of communist experiments in the past, and see if you can learn anything from that. And I think that is a really, really valuable lesson for us today. We shouldn't be just denying things from the past and just being like, no, it's Western propaganda, it never happened, like kind of thing, or just being like she's pointed out here, it's not true communism. We shouldn't just be like, oh well, it wasn't real socialism or real communism, and just use that as an argument, not to take into consideration what happens historically when people have tried to do this stuff in the past. So there are structural challenges with central planning. Got it. Okay. It's hard to plan things. And it leaves the door open for inefficiencies and corruption. Fair point. I think that's a good way of, like, you know, if you want to do this again, you'd want to be conscious of that. Power dynamics. It results in authoritarianism. Well, I think you could use the, you know, historical material conditions themselves to explain that. Like we spoke about on Monday, like, these nations weren't advanced nations trying to become communists. So they weren't like high-tech industrial societies, you know, at the forefront of, you know, industrial development trying to become communist. They were basically agrarian societies, a bunch of peasants who were just like, all right, well, we're going to start to make steel now and we're going to use electricity. Like, I know you guys have never had electricity before, but you're all going to get used to that overnight. And so, like, you know, they were trying to bring forward industrial society at breakneck speed, and with at breakneck speed there are obviously going to be consequences of that. So, like, I would say they're not considering the historical context of, like, what these countries were trying to do. Ben Burgess covers the "It's Not True Communism and Socialism" critiques of dissenters, though. They equate to a "no true Scotsman" fallacy. Look, I get that point, like, you know, like, it's not true this and it's not true that. I get that kind of, like, the weight behind making an argument along those lines, but I also would like to appreciate that you should be looking at historical examples of where this has been tested, so you can find lessons in it. Like, you don't have to submit and say, okay, this is what communism is, but you can say, well, someone has tried it and this is what happened, so can we do it better next time? Not, we should never do this ever again. But when you are analyzing historical context of things, it's not a bad thing to point out that Nova Scotia is not Scotland. Yes, I think that's a good point. Human behavior. Historical examples test assumptions about the cooperation and selflessness in large-scale systems, highlighting tensions between theory and practice. Well, like, I think there is, like, an underlying assumption in the notion that, like, communism is about selflessness and, like, you know, unhinged cooperation only. Like, human societies deal with a lot of kind of human emotions and types of social integration, and so, like, just to think that communism pins on just everyone accepting unceasing cooperation and selflessness is just stupid. Communism doesn't really have anything to do with that. It helps us understand how we can improve future revolutions. Yes. Thank you, Wings of Cheese. Like, I'm sick of, like, kind of this notion, and you hear this from kind of people that critique socialism, communism and stuff. It's just like, well, we've tried it in the past and it didn't work, so we're never going to do it again, like, kind of thing. And why would you want to do it again? It's just like, why would you want to do anything again if you fail at something? Like, would you ever have ridden a bike if, like, the first time you fell off, you were just like, oh, well, obviously I can't ride a bike then. Never going to do that again. Like, the same applies at the individual level to a societal wide level. Like, you know how many times, like, capitalism tried to invent itself and then was crushed before, like, it really took a hold as an economic system? Like, it went through iterations, and, like, it went through a lot of chaos too. Fuck, look what happened to France. Like, that place was fucked during the revolutionary period of the bourgeois, like, trying to take power from the monarchy. That place was fucking hardcore. And, like, you know, they got there eventually. They brought capitalism basically to the European mainland. And, like, even the Americans with the English, like, you know, they had to have a revolution in order to do that, like, to bring capitalism to life properly for the Americans themselves. So, like, it was never easy ground. Like, all I'm saying is, like, you know, just because something didn't work once, or it didn't work for a certain time period, doesn't mean you never do it again. Like with flying. Airplane. That's right. It's just pessimism. That shit gets nothing done. That shit gets nothing done. Yes, you are right, 4AS. Look, we got 7 people watching right now. Introduce yourself in the chat. Say hello. We are debating ChatGPT right now. If you're wondering what the hell is going on, we are trying to use the old critique of, communism, like, it's been done before. We'll never try it ever again. And we're debating ChatGPT to see if, like, she has any valuable insights from her massive access to data, to see if she can basically tell us why, we should never try communism ever again. And like basically what she's come up with is like there's 2 critiques of communism. There's the ideological critique, that centers on the idea of communism itself, and then there is the historical implementation critique, which is like, well, we've tried communism before and this is what happened. Do you really want to do that again? And so like there's 5 central arguments to this idea, and we're going to basically go through each one of those from the historical implementation side, and then we'll get into like the ideological stuff, like why she thinks that communism doesn't work from an ideological perspective. All right, so let's ask it the first question. All right, returning to your 5 points about the historical implementation of communism and critiques on that basis, full stop. I would like to go through each point one by one. So let us start with dot point number 1, historical failures, full stop. Now, these historical critiques claim that the Soviet Union and Maoist China led to authoritarian regimes, economic inefficiencies, and human rights abuses. Full stop. They also claim that centralized planning fails to provide for citizens' needs effectively. Full stop. I would argue that this is a historical failure based on the historical context as opposed to the ideas of communistic society itself. Full stop. For example, authoritarian regimes were a result of the pressures these societies were under at the time. Full stop. In the case of the USSR, for example, the day after the revolution, they were at war with at least 14 other nations. And so they had to set up regimes to defend their nations. Full stop. Can you please critique my response? Question mark. Please be as brief as possible. Let's see what she comes up with. Yeah, it's like 14 other countries. Some people say like 17 other countries. But I guess it depends how you count them, and at that time in history as well. But basically, like the day after the Russian Revolution, like kind of thing, because like all the capitalist nations were like, oh crap, What if people start doing that with us as well? Like basically everyone declared war on the Soviet Union, and they were like supportive of like the White Army, who were kind of the counter-revolutionary movement within Russia. And so, yeah, there was like at least all the mainland European nations plus Britain and America, anyone that was capitalist basically declared war on the Russians. Just like though, like, you know, when the French Revolution started, right? And like the French Liberation Army, their national the national bourgeois movement happened in France, and they deposed the king to set up their parliamentary monarchy. Every nation in Europe like declared war on them instantly, because they were like, oh well, this threatens our monarchical institutions, and so like just by default they declare war on them. It's crazy. They were worried about Marxism and revolutionary ideologies, similar to when the French seized power during the... Yes. Oh my god, like we got some telepathic link going on there. Okay, let's see what she says.
Your argument highlights an important nuance. The historical context surrounding revolutionary societies often shape their outcomes, suggesting that authoritarianism in the USSR or Maoist China arose from external pressures rather than inherent flaws in communist theory. This is a valid perspective, but it can be critiqued on a few grounds.
Ooh, here it
One,
comes.
structural vulnerabilities. While external pressures certainly played a role, critics argue that centralized planning and concentration of power in a single party inherently facilitated authoritarian outcomes. The theoretical framework may not adequately address how to prevent these dynamics even under duress. To precedent of transition,
Fair enough.
if the transition to communism consistently results in authoritarianism due to external pressures, this raises questions about the viability of the theory in a hostile global environment. A robust theory would
Yes,
account for these
that's a good
challenges and propose safeguards against authoritarian tendencies. Comparison with other systems. Critics might point out that other ideologies have faced similar pressures without resorting to authoritarianism, suggesting that external conditions alone don't fully explain the outcome. Would you like to address these critiques or move to the next point?
It's not bad, is it? Hey? That's why, like, this type of stuff, debating AI, like, you can really test the robust nature of your ideological framework by, like, going toe-to-toe with ChatGPT. It's presumptive. Oh! Which one? The third point is presumptive? Yeah, because I think she is assuming in point 3 there that other ideologies have faced similar pressures and just done it okay. But like we just talked about, like in the case of the French Revolution, they didn't do that. They didn't do that at all. They resorted to various forms of authoritarianism in order to deal with the onslaught of all the European monarchies. No other system has defaulted to authority. Yeah, that's very presumptuous. Maybe we can pick her up on that. But like I did like the way that she said, if a transition to communism consistently results in authoritarianism due to external pressures, this raises questions about the viability of the theory in a hostile global environment. And I think that's a really good point. Who says communism is centralized economies and single party governments? That's a good point too. Thank you for introducing yourself, PTR Novi. Who came up with this definition that yes, communism is central planning and single party governments, like one party systems? That's a good point that we should be picking up on as well. But like she's running under some assumptions here because we told her at the start of this argument, because there were two kind of avenues to go down. There was like a critique of communism in the ideological sense, and then there was a critique of communism in the historical sense. So like looking at examples of communism in the past. So she's taking it from the standpoint that these communist societies, so like the USSR and China under Mao, took on one party and centralized planning roles in their kind of scope of what communism is. So, but like, it's a good point. There's a general assumption that all that communism is central planning and one-party systems, which is not right. But we have told, or at least requested of ChatGPT to ignore that for now. So, but like it does raise a good question, right, about the viability of the theory in a hostile global environment. Okay, I like that point. I don't like the follow-up sentence, which is a robust theory would account for these challenges and propose safeguards against authoritarian tendencies. No, wrong. Because as we've discussed before, like we discussed on Monday, right? What these countries were trying to do, were they were trying to industrialize in a capitalist world that had already turned imperialist and would have basically kept them undeveloped or used them just as a colony for labor extraction, and would have just exploited them as a labor force, and as basically an agrarian society. So in order to industrialize, they went down the path of Marxism, like a Marxist understanding of economics, and like, you know, used communism, quote unquote, to get there. So like they had to, in a hostile environment, resort to the measures that they resorted to in order to basically deliver advanced societies to their people. That was the main objective. It wasn't transitioning to a full-blown communistic society in a couple of generations. It was industrializing their nations. And that's what they achieved. So with that in light, you don't have to worry about the robustness of the theory in a hostile global environment. You don't have to worry about that because their intention was industrialization. I think the reason that the Soviet Union was authoritarian during the Civil War and after war was because the Bolsheviks took into account the Paris Commune and its failure to defeat Prussia and France. Yeah, it couldn't meet, it couldn't rise to the challenge of like the, you know, the massive forces that were rallying against it. It was just, you know, one little city against like massive national forces. And so, like, yes, they were trying to learn from that, and they had to learn from that in the sense of they needed a combined effort. They needed a centralized effort in that. And so, like, they took whatever means necessary to achieve that. And that's very Leninist. All right, Lenin was all for that type of stuff. It's just like, play the game that's in front of you, and then we'll figure out the niceties afterwards. So, like, you know, you gotta, like, there's a lot to learn from that. Like, you know, he pulled off a significant revolution, Lenin. So you gotta be able to appreciate him from a revolutionary standpoint. Yes, you do what you have to kind of survive, kind of thing. Whether or not that aligns with socialism or communism, that's a completely different question. But like, if we're just looking at it from a revolutionary perspective, like, yes, he was doing what he needed to make sure the revolution survived, not communist and socialist ideals. So anyway, I want to just touch on that point that ChatGPT has raised here, which is really good about, like, you know, the question, it raises questions about the viability of the theory in a hostile environment. I do believe we now, with the historical examples, with the historical examples of, like, let's just take the big key ones that everyone talks about, USSR and Maoist China. Let's take those two historical examples. Now, Marx always argued from his historical materialist perspective that the revolution would come in the most advanced capitalist nations because that's where the working class was the most politically developed. So the proletarians were there at the coalface, literally the coalface of industry, and like were fighting against the capitalists and, like, you know, developing themselves, etc., etc. And then, like, as a result, they were the places to have the revolution. But they were also advanced in the sense that they were already industrialized. Now, these revolutions, these socialist and communist revolutions, happened in countries that were not advanced. They were not industrialized. They were, in that sense, premature. And so this raises questions about the viability of the theory in a hostile global environment. I would argue similar to that, like, if you are an agrarian nation, as like they would have said, like, you know, in their talk 150 years ago, a backwards nation. If you are a backwards nation and you want to take on the most advanced capitalist countries on earth, who are going to team up against you and then try to industrialize kind of thing and do that under, loosely socialist and communist principles, like you are going to have a massive problem there. And Marx wouldn't have ever considered that really, because he would have thought from a historical materialist perspective, you would just jump on to a socialist revolution from like England or Germany, an advanced industrial nation. And then you don't have to worry about those types of problems, which is like, not only do we have to fight off the capitalist machine, but we have to fucking industrialize at breakneck speed as well. And so like these people, the Russians and the Chinese, were not only trying to pull a rabbit out of the hat by fighting off the entire conglomeration of capitalist nations, but like they were also trying to fight like internally and try to industrialize like mental, like crazy. And like, that's no easy task. And like, it's very, very permissible to think that they would have like struggled with that. They would have struggled with that. So like, I think, yes, communism, scientific socialism, if you think of it like that, it doesn't stand up as a theory when you think about it trying to take a hold in a completely hostile global environment. That was not how Marx had envisaged socialism and then the lead on to communism from actually happening. That is definitely not how he thought it was going to take place from a scientific socialistic standpoint. So with that in mind, I'm not discounting what they've done. They did admirable things to try and pull their countries and their peoples out of being backwards countries into being advanced societies, but it came at certain costs. It came at certain very, very extreme costs. And like, we need to take that into consideration. But like, that doesn't undermine the theory, because the theory was always that it would happen in the advanced capitalist nations themselves, from a Marxist perspective anyway. I don't know if that's also from any other hardcore leftist, radical leftist standpoint, but definitely from a Marxist standpoint. And I think there is good reason to think like that and to consider things from that perspective. It doesn't undermine the theory. Again, this is just a historical issue, I think. I'm just going to point out the fact that she's running on massive assumptions. I think 4Ace has got a good point. So in regards to point 3, you raise this notion that other ideologies have faced similar pressures without resorting to authoritarianism, comma. However, this seems like an absolutely baseless assumption. Full stop. Can you briefly provide any examples that would assist in us understanding this avid claim? Question mark. All right. Let's hear what she's got.
You're right to scrutinise this claim. Examples often cited to support it include 1. Post-revolutionary America 1776. After the American Revolution, the new government faced threats from Britain, internal rebellions, e.g. Shays Rebellion, and economic hardship, yet maintained a republican system rather than descending into authoritarianism.
It's questionable.
2. France after 1848, during the Second Republic. France faced internal conflict and external pressures, but initially maintained democratic reforms, though it later fell into authoritarianism under Napoleon III.
Not a good example, is it?
3. South Korea, 1950s to 1980s. While not free from authoritarian phases, South Korea transitioned from war-torn conditions to a democratic framework despite immense external threats during the Korean War and Cold War pressures. Each case has caveats, but proponents argue these examples show that ideological systems can survive turmoil without long-term authoritarian regimes. Critics of communism argue that communism's centralization inherently predisposes it to authoritarian outcomes under stress, unlike ideologies emphasizing decentralization. Does this help clarify the point?
Well, look, I think we've got ChatGPT done on this one. Like, I don't know about you, but like the examples that she's come up with are pretty weak. Like, to be honest, I think we've got her backed into a corner and she can't come up. They're pretty dubious. Yeah. Bloody oath. I love that word. Might get that tattooed somewhere. Maybe on my ass. Dubious. Check that out. Come on. Like, those aren't like solid examples. Like, let me just give you a response now. I'm not going to fight her on this one because I think we've won. And like, that's pretty good because like she's got an extensive database to get through. I think we have won this discussion with, unless somebody else thinks, like, just tell me in the chat if you think that she's right. I think we've got her won over on this one. But like, look, point number one, post-revolutionary America. After the American Revolution, the new government faced threats from Britain, internal rebellions, economic hardship, yet maintained a republican system rather than descending into authoritarianism. Hello? Like, by what standard do you measure a republican system? If it's just like a bunch of bourgeois people who have voting rights, then that is not a republic system. Like, people didn't have franchisement at that point. The general population didn't have franchisement. There was just people who had money or property that were allowed to vote. The vast majority of the population, women, like slaves, all of those people that made up the Americas and stuff like that, they weren't voting at that point. They were not voting. It was just a system for bourgeois control. So you could say that it was Republican in name kind of thing, but like, is it Republican by today's standards? Was it Democratic by today's standards? No, it was just a group of like the richest colonialists at the time making all of the decisions for everyone. You can push her one more time, I guess. See what she says. Imagine thinking slavery was authoritarianism. I don't know. And then like even the France after 1848. Okay, like France after 1848, we're talking about like, 60 years after the original revolution. They've had multiple chances to try and get bourgeois and liberal societies right, and they finally got it down after the Second Republic, like after fucking 6 decades of trialing this shit. Then she pulls out an example where they were kind of like, oh, well, we did it this one time where we did it with democratic reforms, but then it later still fell into authoritarianism anyway when like Napoleon III took power. So like, it was never stable. It was never just this like, oh, once like they took power kind of thing, it was democratic forever after that. No, it was like constantly moving back and forth between authoritarianism and like democratic reforms, like democratic loosely as well, like again in a bourgeois sense democratic, like only people that had property had voting rights, and it was definitely not women either, so it was only like half the population at best who could have ever voted. So not a very good like strike for how democracy prevails when people are struggling for their social organization. All men are born equal, to some more equal than others. Yeah, it's a good bloody quote. It's a disturbing quote, unfortunately. South Korea, 1950s to the 1980s, while not free from authoritarian phases, again, so it's not a good example if it's dipping in and out of democracy and authoritarianism. Hello. South Korea transitioned from war-torn conditions to democratic framework despite immense external threats during the Korean War and Cold War pressures. Hello. It was like South Korea was basically a vassal state of the United States after the war, because the United States didn't want the communists to take the hold of the whole of East Asia. So they cut Korea in half, literally cut it in half along like one of the latitude lines. Latitude or longitude? Maybe longitude line. They just literally cut it in half, and it was like, communists, you have the top half, we'll take the bottom half, thank you very much. They set up a Korean dictator like a democratic regime. Like they basically set up a dictator that would do whatever the Americans wanted to do. And then like they plunged the Americans by proxy, plunged them into like conflicts and like a stalemate between their Northern Korean counterparts. And so they had to live with that for ages. I don't think that was a very good example either. I don't know why she's bringing these up, but that's good. I think that's really good because like it kind of raises a point here that like if other people are saying that other ideologies have faced similar pressures without resorting to authoritarianism, and the examples she gives are one like define authoritarianism, and by today's standards it would be this example here, which was basically like it just dipped between democracy and authoritarianism, and again acknowledgement that it was basically authoritarian phases with dabbles in democracy, then like that's exactly what happened in the case of the USSR. That's exactly what happened in the case of China. Like, yeah, they were one parties, but they were democratic within the one party machine. So like, they're democratic, they're dabbling with democracy and authoritarianism, just like these cases of ideologies that have faced similar pressures and done it differently. The examples aren't good. So like, I think that's really, really interesting. Let's go to her point number 2, human nature. Oh God, I hate this conversation. Like they talk about assumptions. Let's go with this one. Some believe communism's emphasis on collective ownership and equal distribution of resources conflicts with human tendencies like self-interest and competition, making it difficult to sustain in practice. All right. Well, like this is like, it's a fair point in the sense of like self-interest is a problem with capitalist society. And so if you're transitioning out of capitalist society, like, yeah, it's going to be difficult to wipe self-interest out of the game. But like, it's not a good point because I think it's false to assume that human tendencies are always centered around self-interest and competition. Like human tendencies are not just limited to those two things. And so like you have to be careful about what you are defining as human tendencies. Well, what are you saying for us? What the famous saying, or no, always disregard arguments who base themselves on human nature or its natural. They are dubious at best. There is that word again. Thank you for saying it. 4IS. I think that's a good point. So like I would challenge her on the assumption that human nature is something that is defined at all, like by some type of human relationship, like human relations. Like human nature is in essence can't be defined by like things like self-interest and competition, etc., etc. Emphasis on conflicts with self-interest and competition. Okay. Can you please expand on this point a little bit? Question mark. I feel like you are running on an assumption that self-interest and competition are features of human nature itself, full stop. I am worried that you are not taking into consideration that human tendencies are the result of environmental factors, i.e., the society that you live in, like one subjected to the capitalist mode of production. Let's see what she has to say for herself. Whoop. Uh-oh. It's a long response. Strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen. I should have said briefly.
You've made a strong point by questioning the assumption that self-interest and competition are innate features of human nature. Critics of communism often assert this as a universal truth, but it's worth critically examining whether these traits are natural or shaped by the socio-economic environment, particularly under capitalism. Environmental conditioning. Human behavior is significantly influenced by the prevailing social and economic systems. In capitalist societies, where success is often tied to individual achievement and competition, self-interest becomes a survival strategy. However, anthropological and historical evidence suggests that humans have also demonstrated tendencies toward cooperation, altruism, and collectivism in various contexts. Hunter-gatherer societies. For most of human history, survival depended on shared resources and cooperative labor rather than competition. Mutual aid in communities. In times of crisis, e.g. natural disasters, people often organize collectively to provide mutual support, transcending competitive tendencies. Communal societies. Small-scale communities, such as certain indigenous cultures, have historically organized around shared ownership and collective decision-making. Critique of human nature. 1. Flexibility of behavior. Human tendencies are adaptable to different modes of production. Capitalism prioritizes competition, but socialism might foster cooperation as the dominant behavior if the environment rewards it. 2. Ideological bias. Claims about human nature often reflect the dominant ideology of the time, perpetuating systems like capitalism as inevitable or natural. 3. Material conditions. Marxist theory argues that material conditions, not immutable human traits, shape societal behavior. In a system where collective benefit is tied to personal well-being, self-interest might align with cooperative behavior. Counter-argument. Critics might argue that competitive behavior has evolutionary roots and emerges even in cooperative settings, as seen in hierarchies within social animals. They might also point to experiments in psychology suggesting innate preferences for personal gain.
Conclusion.
The question of whether self-interest and competition are inherent or environmentally conditioned is critical to evaluating communism. Your concern aligns with Marxist thought, which views human nature as historically contingent, shaped by material conditions rather than being fixed. This perspective suggests that a shift in socio-economic organization could foster a corresponding shift in dominant human behaviors.
Look, I think it's a good point, and something that we should be conscious of is kind of the idea that, like, human nature, you know, like certain human tendencies are influenced by kind of the circumstances that you are in, and like things might not necessarily transcend all societies at all times, kind of thing. There might be some certain, tendencies that do, but they may be related to very, very basic kind of functions, like, our tendencies to be sexual beings because we need to reproduce as a species, as an organism. There may be tendencies towards, lust in regards to food, because like we do have certain desires within our body, like chemical desires, in order to make sure that we feed ourselves continually so we actually survive. So there's arguments to like certain parts of what are human tendencies that transcend kind of all epochs and all stages of human development. But like it is something that we need to definitely counteract when you have conversations with people that are just like, no, greed is human nature kind of thing. Like everyone's just greedy, humans are just greedy, or like competition is the way to go. Like humans are just naturally competitive and that's what advances the human race kind of thing. It's just like, well, fuck, like where did you get that one from? Like honestly, Like if if competition was a driving force between, everything, if for anyone who's ever had siblings, or anyone who's ever had children, like you don't raise your kids by like pitting them off against each other and just being like, all right, here's one lamb chop and there's two of you. So like someone's going to eat tonight and someone's going to starve. So good luck to both of you, like kind of thing. That's just not how humans innately kind of work. If competition was just like written into our DNA kind of thing as a starting point of human nature, then like, you would see it proliferating through all forms of our social reactions and all parts of our daily lives. And so like I think there are certain elements, especially in our economic considerations, so at work or in the education system, where we're pinned up against other individuals and there's like a hierarchy thing going on, or there's like a class system going on, so there's divisions between interest groups. Yes, you see competition rising out of like conflicts between different interest groups. And I am not saying here either that competition isn't essential. Competition is very important, and it's a vital kind of element in the human psyche in order to kind of make sure that we're developing to the fullest extent of our individual potential and our potential as a society. However, I do believe though that competition is in a dialectical relationship with cooperation. And so like it takes both, and like sometimes there's a happy middle ground between competition and cooperation, and sometimes it takes all cooperation and sometimes it takes all competition. But to flat out just to say that like kind of human nature revolves around kind of self-interest and competition, and communism doesn't address those features, I think is wrong. Like if we're just going to look at this as a kind of a historical implementation argument here, so we're just looking at this as like, okay, did communism work, or can communism work based on the USSR and China and stuff like that? Competition was a huge part of the USSR. It was a huge part of China. All right, they developed education systems, they made their societies literate, they pulled them up and raised their living standards, and like people competed in their education systems, people competed in their societies and rose were able to rise on the political spectrum and on climb the political ladder, basically based on their talents, their merits. People were basically able to rise through the education system, rise through the military system based on their merits. So there's a form of competition in that. Like the USSR defined itself basically in competition to the Americans, so their society definitely had a grasp of what competition was. They were able to beat the Americans in basically the entire, in every measure of the space race, opposed to like basically one component of it. And like they were constantly competing with the capitalist machine, the imperialist machine kind of thing. So competition was definitely a factor there in these societies. It's just whether or not there was a balance, a dialectical balance in relation to cooperation and competition in these societies. And so like I think this argument comes down to, because the Soviet Union ended up imploding and giving up, kind of thing, then without self-interest and competition it failed. And that's the ultimate argument here. I think that's where people get their argument, as in the human tendencies of interest and competition weren't nurtured enough in a communistic environment, or under communism in the USSR, and so it failed, kind of thing. I think that's really if that is a factor, it's one of 1,000 factors, 1,000,000 factors, and you can't look at that on its own to say that was the thing that brought down the Soviet Union. I think that is really narrow-minded and myopic to look at it like that, really incredibly. Don't you also need a small degree of private property on a small scale initially to change the mode of production from capitalism to socialism? Don't you also need a small degree of private property on a small scale to initially change the mode of production from capitalism? Yeah, possibly. I guess it really depends what stage of development you're at. like if you look at kind of the way that where we're at right now with capitalism. So, like, if you want to call it late stage capitalism or financial capitalism, you want to call it big tech capitalism. Well, like, I think because of the conglomeration, at least with the USSR. Oh, well, look, like, I think that's evident in the history of what happened in the USSR. Like, they they tried to socialize everything really fast and try to collectivize a lot of stuff. But like even Lenin at one point was kind of like, oh crap, we need free markets to a certain extent to help the transitional process. So like, yeah, I think historical history shows that yes, they definitely needed a level of private property and capitalism, or like a free market element of it, to help the system, help supplement the system. Even in the case of the Chinese, like one of Mao's like first initiatives when the communists kind of took power, he was like, it was the unification between like kind of four groups in that society. He wanted the Chinese bourgeoisie. He wanted them to be an integral part of Chinese development. He saw there were two bourgeoisies. There were like the bourgeoisie that was interested in themselves only, and then there was the bourgeoisie that was interested in China. So like he needed that capitalist class that was interested in developing China as a nation kind of thing. And he was happily ready to do deals with them and integrate them into the communist system. And so like you had the working class, you had the bourgeois, and you had like the peasantry, and like they all united together, all of them united together to give like Mao's version of communist China kind of thing. And so like he was fully accepting that you needed to have kind of, you know, a mishmash of societies, of like components in society to make it work. So like, I guess it depends on how advanced the society is. I think it does as well. So class traitors. What do you mean by class traitors? Do you mean by like with the bourgeoisie that like he wasn't interested in? They were like, in his sense, they were nationalistic traders. They were people that were not interested in China's development at all. They were just interested in like making the capitalists. Yeah, they were not interested in China's development. They were just interested in what they could get out of China. And so like the capitalists that were interested in helping China, he was all for. And he knew that those capitalists were going to help develop and industrialize China to an extent, which is where he wanted to go. He wanted to industrialize China. And so like he knew that this was kind of the way to do it. So like, I just went on a massive rant there, but like, I see, I'm unclear. Do either socialism or communism really prohibit private property? Okay, this is a good question, and like this is getting back to the fundamentals here, which I think is very important to cover. And by the way, hello David, welcome to the live stream. Good to see you. Our American foreign correspondent. Thank you for joining us. Private property. Okay, private property in a Marxist sense, a socialist sense, communist sense, is a very particular form of property. Private property is any type of property that adds to GDP. So like gross domestic product, basically anything that adds value to society at large. So if you had like I don't know, a garden in your backyard or something like that, and like you grew lettuces and tomatoes and stuff like that, and you used them for your own personal consumption, or like who knows, maybe you pickled some cucumbers and gave it to your neighbors. Like you're not using those resources basically to produce value in which you go and sell, and like, you know, you employ people in your home and they come in and like you pay them a wage and then they make pickles for you and you sell them off at the market. You're not making any value out of that situation. You're not adding to like global GDP, to your nation's GDP. You're just like, you're using that for personal use. Any personal property, like that is your own property. Private property, though, is the means of production. So like I said, anything that contributes to the value of society. So in an American context, it's all of the factories and the industry out there. It's all of the resources that your nation has. So if it has access to oil, if it has access to gold or any metals or any important elements, like all of those things that add value to your society, that's private property because it's held by private capitalists usually and private interest groups, so they can profit off it. They're not holding it because they just love gold or they love oil, and so they keep oil in their backyard and they keep it in their fridge and they, like, you know, sleep with it at night. It's not for personal use. Most people that, like, you know, that mine, like a big corporation that mines oil, they use it to make profit off it. They have industry to make profit off it. Most people that, like, own land to then hire out to some other capitalist to kind of make money off it, that rent, they're seeking money. They're only holding that land so they can rent it out to someone and seek money off it. So in socialism and communism, private property is banned in the sense that anything that adds value to society should be held in common. It should be socialized, and that is what private property is. Private property is not your personal property. It is not your toothbrush. Okay, you are allowed to brush your teeth in socialism and communism because that toothbrush belongs to you. The communists aren't going to kick your door down and come and take your toothbrush away from you. They're not going to take your house away from you either. If you live somewhere, you use it personally. There is a function to that. There is a use value to that. But if you own 50 properties to rent them out and to profit off that, like, you don't need to own 50 houses. You cannot live in 50 houses all at the same time. So you don't need to just just basically hoard resources and exclude everyone else from using them, because, like, you want to profit off that. So under socialism, and this is what Wings of Cheese was asking before, can you actually have private property under socialism? And yes, you can have private property under socialism, because as a transitional period coming out of capitalism and onto communistic society where there won't be any private property anymore, there is a transitional period in socialism where it might be necessary to have some capitalists out there with private property to help help supplement your growth and your development as a socialist society. It might not be a good idea to all of a sudden make every industry out there, make every workplace out there, make every mine out there a socialized form of industry. It might be a good idea to keep these things as profit generating enterprises and let some capitalists run that private property for a little bit, and then all of a sudden you take it off the market in terms of it being profitable, a profitable enterprise, a profitable system of exchange. And so in socialism, you probably would have a mix of private property and socialized property. But as you would get closer and closer to communism, and this is just all theory, let's be honest, but as you get closer and closer to communism, then you would have much less private property. Private property would disappear. Again, not personal property. People have their own stuff that they use as individuals, as communities, as societies. They own things personally to be able to use them, and privately. But private property, in the Marxist sense, in the socialist sense, in the communist sense, is anything that adds value to that society, or like people extract profit off somehow. All of those things can be socialized, can be held in common as a collective, and then should just assume and become part of society more broadly after that in a communist sense. All right, I hope that explains for you what the difference is in that regard. Private property is specifically things that are owned by people to make money out of them or to make profit from them. It's not personal property. Personal property is stuff that you use on a daily basis, or you just use for your own personal benefit. Yes, there would be no need for a state and class would wither away. Yeah, in a situation where like you developed that system to a full extent where private property became less and less and less and everything started being owned collectively more and more and more, then like the state would disappear and like classes would disappear because you wouldn't have like economic disparities. You wouldn't have inequalities between people based on economic grounds anymore, because like property would be collectivized and socialized and owned by groups of people, if not the entire society generally. I hope that makes sense. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get rid of the human nature argument, because I hate the human nature argument. I think it's just wrong based on many, many horrible assumptions. So it doesn't really have any validity. And let's go to point number 3 as to why people usually critique historical examples of communism and why they use that as an argument against communism. So here, lack of incentives. Opponents often argue that without the potential for profit or personal gain, individuals and businesses may lack motivation to innovate, work hard, or take risks, potentially leading to stagnation. It's an interesting one. Will there still be a need for an armed vanguard groups? Like if the state withers away? That's a good question, Wings of Cheese. I've often thought of that myself. Like, would you need violent coercion, or like at least self-defense, let's call it? If it's not violent coercion, would you still need to have an armed group of people, or everyone? Like, you know, like a lot of countries after World War II kind of make like military service for their, you know, young people necessary, just in case they're ever plunged into war again. People at least know how to use a gun, and they know some, like, you know, some basic military kind of intelligence, so they can kind of exist in a warring environment, or under a state of warfare. Like, would that become like necessary? And like, I think the question is like, would be how developed is communism at that point? Because like, as I see it theoretically, and like historical materialism would show us this, is that like, if there is a predominant mode of production like capitalism, there's still other modes of production that exist under it. Like there is still arguably like feudal arrangements out there under the capitalist mode of production. There are still some societies out there that like are not developed and they still live in a feudal manner. There are still some societies out there that live almost as hunter-gatherers still. There are still tribes and networks out there that live in like almost hunter-gatherer and tribe-like societies, and like they haven't been touched by capitalism as such. And so like, if you had communism, we're really looking at hypotheticals here, but like if you had communism as the dominant mode of production now in society, but like you still had the remnants of capitalism somewhere, right? You still had the remnants of even feudalism. But let's just make it simple. Let's just say you had a communist society, you lived in a communist society, and that was the dominant mode of production across the entire planet, but like there still existed some capitalism somewhere here or there. There would always be the threat of reaction and counter-revolution, I would say. Because if you lived in a fully communistic society, and like you got rid of classes, you got rid of money, and like you got rid of basically the need for warfare, then if capitalism still existed somewhere, capitalism's tendency itself is to always compound and grow, like ceaselessly, and increase and increase and increase, because that's how capitalism works. In order for there to be the profit, like for profit to exist, you need that exponential growth. And so capitalism has to expand. And so like if communism became this broad mode of production, like the predominant one across the globe, but there were still a few countries that were capitalist, they would ceaselessly need to expand. They would need to expand in order to justify themselves and in order to exist. And if they did that, then like eventually they would come up against communism, like, or communist modes of production. Yeah, like a disease. Yeah, like a viral kind of, yeah, like a disease actually, because like some diseases, some viruses, I guess, they just want to survive so they don't kill their host. But like, you know, some diseases just completely wipe out. They just make you more and more sick and they kill you. But like, yeah, capitalism would start to grow again. And so it would come up against communism. And if like communism had reached a point where it was like, so kind of stateless and classless that like it had given up on all of these notions of having to kind of, I don't know, have any type of armed group, or like having to arm its population and self-defend itself if necessary, or defend itself, sorry, if necessary, then yeah, capitalism would potentially come back, and it would do that by force. Capitalism basically does that as an inherent tendency, I would say, of capitalism. It has a militaristic arm to it. And so if communism wasn't like all encompassing, it didn't take up the entire of society, like capitalism was basically erased, like it couldn't come back in any form, and everything was just communistic now. If there was elements of capitalism still around, then yes, I would think you would need an armed group of some form, or you'd need self-defense. You'd need people to know basically how to fight back against people that threatened the system. So interesting thought experiment there, and I think yeah, it's necessary. I do think it's necessary. So yeah, I want to touch on dot point 3 here now. It's a bit abstract at this point, but I wonder how capitalism would come back, if it would be under a fascist or liberal form. I guess like fascism and liberal forms of capitalism is just how to organize capitalism best at any given point, right? So like you have to think of like capitalism as like as an entire system, as an entire totality, and so like it's just the economic mode, so how things are produced, and so like everything's produced for profit, but then like how does it organize itself like socially? Whatever kind of makes sure that that mode of production, that profit motive, is being fulfilled, will be the thing that sustains it. So at this point in time, it's liberal democracies that help capitalism keep reproducing itself. But like at some point, if fascism does a better job, or authoritarianism does a better job than liberal democracies at helping capitalism reproduce itself, then fascism and authoritarianism will take over liberal democracies. So if capitalism was really small and like had been subjugated by this major communistic society that basically took hold of the entire of the planet, then maybe it might need something a little bit more fascistic or authoritarian to be able to rise to prominence again. It would need like that central kind of planning element to it. It would need something that would really kind of drive it. And like maybe democratic, like liberal democratic styles of governance is too slow to be able to really push you forward. And so you'd need something fascistic in order to really drive as fast as you can towards, being able to take over something that is now a globally predominant economic mode of production in order to fight against that. So yeah, awesome thought experiment stuff. But like this is where my mind goes as well. Wings of cheese. Definitely where my mind goes as well. So yeah, point 3, lack of incentives. Opponents often argue that without the potential for profit or personal gain, individuals and businesses may lack innovation to innovate, work hard, or take risks, potentially leading to stagnation. Well, like, I think there's an argument for that. Like they say that the USSR stagnated at the end and like it was unable to innovate properly and all that sort of stuff. I don't know how much of that is just Western propaganda or if it was true, but like there were critiques like from within, the USSR itself that like, the people in the USSR, they had things provided for them, right? They had really good social safety nets. They had basically really good social welfare. What did I miss? What are we learning today, teacher? Squeebalicious 89. Welcome to the lecture series. Today we are speaking about communism and like whether communism is a bad idea. Now, we asked AI originally, like, is communism a bad idea? What are the critiques of it? And there was two-prong approach. There was basically like communism, the ideology, so like the idea of communism, or is in communism as a historical example. So historical examples of communism being like the USSR and Maoist China. And so like the usual critique of communism is basically like, oh, it didn't work in practice, so it can't work ever. So we thought, let's go down the rabbit hole of the historical examples. So critiquing the historical examples of communism. Nodding along. Good. I'm glad. The historical examples of communism, and see if any of those critiques of communism based on the historical examples hold water. And so like we're up to dot point number 3. We've been kind of debating with AI now for at least an hour and a half. So we're basically on dot point 3 of its kind of general critique of the historical examples of communism. So we're up to it lacks incentive. So as I was saying, in the USSR, there was an interesting phenomenon happening in the later USSR, right? Which was basically the people of the USSR had really good social safety nets. So they had really good education, they had really good access to doctors. They had like, they were generally fed and like housed and all that sort of stuff. So they had access to kind of the basic necessities to make sure that they had like a dignified existence, let's say. However, they were also watching what the Americans were doing. They were watching the TV shows that were coming out of the America, the popular culture that was coming out of the America, the consumer lifestyle, like the fancy cars that they were producing, the nice designer clothes, the holidays that they were going on, like all of this, like I said, really consumerist stuff. And the people in the Soviet Union were kind of just like, shit, I want access to that as well. I want this. I don't want just the basics, like free healthcare or free education, and like next to zero cost housing. Like that stuff is nice, but like now I've got all of that shit. I want all the bells and whistles too. I want a Christmas tree, I want Coca-Cola. Well, they probably had Coke. Let's be honest. I want like I want the fancy stuff too now, and so there was this position in kind of the late USSR where like their own society was falling under the pressure of consumerist capitalism, and like their people themselves were really struggling with the idea that like they had all of the basics covered, but like they lacked the innovation to give them heavy consumer goods, like, and that consumerist lifestyle. And so there is an argument to say that like there is truth to this, that like it potentially leads to stagnation, or like a lack of innovation in that regard. But like the idea that it like stops people from wanting to work hard and take risks, I don't agree with that at all. Like you just have to look at the history of the Soviet Union and the history of China to know that they were much risk takers, like putting people into space, like collectivizing their agriculture and stuff like that. Like you could say that they took some stupid risks. Like they risked a lot with their agriculture, and it led to like massive bouts of starvation, killing millions of people. They were willing to take a lot of risks to try and push ahead at a very, very fast pace, almost too many risks, you could say. So like the argument that they don't take risks and try to innovate at all is wrong, because like the same people will say, oh yeah, but like 100 million people died because of communist decisions. Yeah, well, but that just shows you that they are willing to innovate and take risks. They just do it with like lots and lots of people, and there's like big ramifications. Relationships can't be allocated out. Your social connections carry more value than your consumer value. Well, I didn't expect that to come from you, Squeeb, but I'm glad you've said it. Yes, you cannot allocate out social connections. No. They can't. They carry more value. I would say yes. They carry more value than consumer value, but you can't quantify social connections like you can consumer goods. And so you can measure consumer goods, but you can't measure social value, which is interesting, if you think about it, because it's just like it's unstructured data. It's just too yeah, it's something that you can't measure easily. And so if you can't measure it, you can't manage it well either. You can't quantify, but you can feel like you're without. Yes, yes. But like I would argue that like the things that these people in the late USSR, they weren't struggling with the fact that they were wanton in relation to their social connections. They had all the social connections they needed. they were worried about missing out on the nice consumer goods. So yeah, the grass is always greener. So you get to a certain point. That's a really good way of summarizing it. You get to a certain point in the height of the USSR where people are like, they just want what the Americans had. So like they're covered in terms of the basics, and they just wanted what the Americans had. Now the grass is always greener. And so there is that element that happens. And this is what happens when you're the inferior player on the world stage. In those times, like it was definitely global capitalism was the main mode of production, and like these other forms like the USSR, they were definitely subordinate. And so like they were never going to be able to fully compete with global capitalism. So like that's just a factor. Like they were never going to be able to compete with the size of the economy of the Americans. Like the American economy was, in terms of GDP and the value that it produced, was like 10 times larger than the USSR. Like massive. That's where consumerism trumps, because it aligns to a core principle of people, not a share equal, but rather why can't I have more, or a feeling that you have less than another. Now this is the point I'm making though, Squeeb. Okay, wait, hold your thought there that like this is inherently human. The predominant mode of production was capitalism. So even if you lived in the USSR, you were still conscious of what the capitalists were doing, or capitalist societies were doing. You were getting that information through broadcasts, through the TV, through media and stuff like that. And you were seeing, oh my God, they had it better than me. They have like all of these niceties. And so as a result of that only, you have this feeling, this inferiority complex, and you'll feel like you're missing out. Now, if though the USSR was the major power between the two of them, and there were more USSR type countries out there that were living this socialist model kind of thing, this anti-capitalist model, let's call it, then the Americans, from looking from the outside in to like this predominant USSR model of doing things, would have been the ones being like, oh shit, they've got the grass is greener over there, we want in on that society. What I'm saying is, the point that I'm making is, the people that were in the USSR looking out to the Americans, they were doing that as the inferior party in that relationship. Global capitalism was way more prominent and productive and value driven in terms of value of commodities than the USSR could have ever have been. The USSR at one point turned insular and it stopped expanding out. And like, unless it competed with capitalism properly and like challenged capitalism at its core, its people were always at some point going to be like, we want what the capitalists have. Like, look at China. The Chinese weren't stupid. By the 70s, they were just like, why compete with capitalism when you could incorporate capitalism into the system? We'll develop it on capitalistic grounds, and then we'll move to socialism after that. The rich still look to the mega rich and say, I want more. I don't think you hit a point. Where you say, I've got enough. Not in capitalism. That's right, Squeep. I agree. Under capitalism, which continually expands, you need continual growth under capitalism. Okay, the world economy should be growing by 3% every year annually in order to accommodate the growth and the profit machine. And so like under a capitalist mindset, if you think of it, things like that, like you constantly have to expand in order to justify profits and all that sort of stuff, then like, yes, enough is never enough. With that mindset. But like under a different mode of production, if like I was saying, the USSR model was the predominant force globally at that point, then you would have a different mindset amongst your people. But your people would be adopting the US mindset, the capitalist mindset, because like, okay, their basic necessities are being met, but like they could have more. That's the capitalist ethos. So like, yes, you're right to an extent under capitalism. That's the argument I'm making here. And like, that's why, so like this lack of incentives kind of thing that ChatGPT has brought up here, like it does make sense under a capitalist system. So like, I'm going to say that to her and see what she says, if she can respond to that and knock me out of the park and say, no, you're wrong for this reason. So the lack of incentives argument that you have raised here makes sense under a global environment that is predominantly capitalistic. Full stop. I don't think this critique holds water in a world where the capitalist mode of production is no longer the predominant force. Full stop. i.e., it is shaping everyone's values and outlook. Full stop. Can you please critique my response and briefly respond? Question mark. Let's see what she says. Oh my God, the suspense. Now let's see what she says.
Your response is compelling as it correctly identifies that the lack of incentives critique is rooted in the values and behaviours promoted under a capitalist framework. In a post-capitalist world where the dominant socio-economic forces prioritise collective well-being and intrinsic motivation over profit, incentives would likely be reshaped. However, this response can be critiqued in a few ways. Critiques of your response. 1. Transition challenges. Critics might argue that even in a world without capitalism, it's unclear what mechanisms would reliably replace material incentives for innovation, hard work, and risk-taking. Human behaviour might not shift quickly enough to sustain a functional system during the transition.
That's a good point.
2. Alternative motivations. While intrinsic motivations, e.g. creativity, purpose, may drive many, it's uncertain whether these alone can produce the level of innovation or productivity needed to meet complex societal needs. 3. Global context. If not all regions abandon capitalism simultaneously, external pressures from capitalist systems might hinder the development of a fully cooperative incentive structure in post-capitalist societies.
That's a good point too.
Brief response. Your argument is strongest if we assume a successful transition to a global or near-global post-capitalist system. In such a scenario, incentives could be based on communal recognition, shared responsibility, and the intrinsic satisfaction of contributing to collective goals. Historical and anthropological evidence of cooperative societies supports this view, though practical details of sustaining innovation and productivity in highly complex modern systems remain a key challenge to address.
Fair enough. Fair enough. If you have a system that makes you a rich bastard, then you act like a rich bastard. Yeah, I guess. Like in the same way that if you have a system that, like, you know, promotes people to the top of a hierarchy, then they think they are justifiably there and they, you know, rule with absolute impunity. Can we shift Japan to consumerism? May sound weird, but they are an economy with surplus resource and under demand of workers. I'm not sure what you mean by and under demand of workers. Surely if you have a system based on cooperation, you would be more cooperative. Yeah, if it was the prevailing force. A declining population, right? That's a big one that I'm always thinking about. People don't have the ability to be content with moral incentive alone. Okay, I agree to a certain extent. Now, let's just... All right, be right back. Let's just pause for a minute and just acknowledge that there is an underlying assumption that runs through a response like the one that she has given. That the underlying assumption is that the profit motive is one, the only motivation out there for humans as social creatures. Let me just clarify that under capitalism, so since, basically the American Revolution onwards, let's say, like you could go back further, but let's not. Let's say from the American Revolution onwards, so about 250 years ago to now, the profit motive has been the main motivation for everything in society. Before that, it didn't exist that way. I've known too many poor post-grads. Yeah, well, that is a massive factor in the capitalist system, that's for sure. Education, and like, what are you going to do with it? Look, let's just acknowledge here that, like, yes, the profit motive as an incentive for doing things, as the predominant incentive, was not there 250 years ago. People worked under other incentives. They were incentivized by other things. They were incentivized, point being, they are intrinsically motivated. Right, okay. All Graeber's baseline communism argument. Point being, they are intrinsically motivated. Okay, fair enough. They are intrinsically motivated, but like they're still unfortunately subjected to the pressures of capitalism when they aren't able to do much because they're poor, I guess, unfortunately. But yes, there's an underlying assumption that the profit motive just exists, and it's the incentive, and it's the best incentive. It is one incentive. Yeah, currency has been around since almost day dot. As long as there's been civilization, there's been like currency in the money form. So like that has been an incentive. So like since ancient times, money has been an incentivizer within society, but not the predominant one. And so it is one incentive in a list of many. And so if you moved to a post-capitalist society, you would still have an incentive there, an incentive based on kind of, I don't know, competition or self-interest and stuff like that. But it wouldn't be the prevailing incentive in society. That is an underlying assumption that is just running through this response. And that comes from the fact that we live in a capitalist society, that everyone just thinks it's just like, oh, but without the profit motive, how would anything work, kind of thing. Well, let me explain it this way. Capitalism was effective and was necessary because there needed to be some type of motivation in order to put people to work, all working together, all rowing in the same direction in this industry or that industry or in that workplace or this workplace or in that manufacturing hub and this manufacturing hub. They had to have some motivation to get these people together to produce industrial society. And so capitalists had that motivation. They had the profit motive, and so they got people together to work socially, and that social work, grouping all of those workers together, was the thing that steamrolled and then birthed industrial society. When industrial society was birthed, then you could argue that you don't need the profit motive anymore in order to get people to work, because people were already brought together, they were already working socially, and we had reached a point with our technology where we didn't need just the profit motive anymore to produce all the stuff that everyone survives off. And so you can develop a society because now we're so advanced. We have the technology, we have the scientific understanding where we could produce value for everyone to live off, but we just don't need to base everything in profit anymore. And so like, I think there is this underlying assumption that innovation just won't happen anymore when people aren't incentivized by profit. That is, I think, absolute nonsense. In the sense that, let's just say, you were fully liberated right now. You didn't have to get a job to survive. You would do what interests you. People that are naturally scientists would gravitate towards the sciences. People that are naturally gamers would gravitate towards gaming. People that are naturally politicians would naturally move to forms of governance. People would align themselves with their interests because they would have other things taken care of. Remember what we were talking about before. This didn't happen in the case of the USSR because they were living in a predominantly capitalist world and they were constantly peering over their neighbor's window and saying, I wish I had some of that shit. Okay, so you didn't have this ability historically because it wasn't the predominant way of doing things. It was still living trapped in a capitalistic society. And so if you were post-capitalist, you would have people incentivized by different things. They would be incentivized to contribute to society in a way that wasn't defined by how much money they could make out of doing it. Because I have to get a job because I have to live in this society, so I have to make money out of it some way. They might be able to contribute based on other social pressures. Their mum might be like, get a job as a scientist because I want you to cure cancer. And so like they might be pressured by their mum to do it. But that wouldn't be based on profitability. That would be based on their family. They might be based on their community arrangements. Maybe their community was like ravaged by fire. So like now they've decided that they want to be a bushfire consultant and make sure all houses are, are ready for the next bushfire season or something like that. Maybe they're only influenced now by like selfish interests. And they're just like, I really love maths. I want to be the best mathematician ever. And so in order to become the best mathematician ever, I have to create some new type of mathematical theorem that's just going to change and revolutionize the human race. Well, they'll go ahead and just do maths. It won't be based on a profit motive. Now, like I said, the profit motive doesn't reign supreme in all cases. It's not behind everyone's decisions, but it seems to be the thing that everyone's worried about that drives innovation. It seems to be the only thing that people are worried about. And it's just like, oh, well, society will stagnate because we understand how profit motives work. And that's the only way that like people do shit, right? Right? That's the only reason people do shit. No, it's not the only reason people do shit because they're going to profit off it. They will do things in their interest or in the interest of their social relations, people that relate to them and stuff like that. So like if we shifted away from this idea that the profit motive is the most efficient way of doing things, okay, it is in a market system and in a system where you have to pay for everything to survive. But if you take away those underlying issues, those underlying concerns that you have to profit in order to survive, then like I think our incentives will change and gradually over time. And this is the transitional challenge that has been raised here, that there will be a transitional period and that will be hard to manage. And I think that is true. It's not going to happen overnight, but incentives can and will change. All right, I've missed a lot in the chat, so I'm going to go over what you guys are talking about here. The underlying assumption is people focus on people's selfishness, not their cooperation. So it's finding life. So it's finding life on planets. The reason we haven't found it elsewhere is because you need a particular set of events and conditions to occur before it's possible. Yeah. Yes. Yes, you need certain circumstances. You need an environment that's conducive to another form of incentive reigning supreme in order for that other type of or set of incentives to reign supreme. And currently in a capitalist mode, you have to agree that like, yes, the profit motive is the most efficient in a market system. And so like people don't see any other way of being incentivized. Like this is the only way to be efficiently incentivized. And yes, okay, in a capitalist system it is. Yes, it makes sense. If by the like you have to, the only way that you can really survive and make a living in this society is by selling yourself and making sure you have a good income. And so yes, profit reigns supreme for you. And it's the liberating force. If I just became a millionaire, I'd be free. That is a prevailing understanding in our society. It's like the American dream. It's like the dream in most capitalist societies. If I just made it and had enough money, I'd be able to live comfortably in this society. And so profit is a key motivational factor there. It's an incentive behind all things. But like it's hindering us too. Like look at the sciences. Like there hasn't been enough development in the sciences because most scientists out there, Like they can't get research funding unless it's from a company, and that company wants an assurance up front that you're going to work on something that's going to prove that my product works, or the ideas that we have. Like, we want you to prove that these things that we're doing is going to be good, and then we'll fund your research. No, you should just fund scientific research, because scientific research should be funded. That develops us as a species, not the profit motive. It becomes a hindrance at a certain point. It's not always the most innovative way of doing things. David, so will gold become worthless because people don't need it as a store of wealth or as an investment? Well, yeah, in the sense that, like, if there's no exchange of commodities anymore, then you don't need something like gold as a unit of exchange and a unit of measure and a unit of wealth anymore. People might still like gold though. They might really value gold because, like, they love gold necklaces or something like that. And then those gold necklaces have cultural significance. Like when certain Arab cultures, they all get married, like they just shower each other in gold necklaces and gold rings because it's a sign of, like, you know, prosperity, and it's a sign of good luck and all that sort of stuff. So like gold might have that intrinsic value to it, like from a cultural perspective, but like it wouldn't be considered as a sign of wealth, and it wouldn't be considered a sign of exchange value anymore. Like for a long time, you know, the dollar was backed on the gold standard. So if you had enough gold reserves, you could back up your monetary system. So yeah, it wouldn't be needed as a sign of wealth and monetary exchange, or just general exchange, anymore in a post-capitalist society. But like, I'm sure gold would still have value to a lot of people. Also, the term fund technically wouldn't exist in communism. Yeah, you wouldn't need to fund resource, but like fund wouldn't technically exist in communism in the sense that, like, from a monetary perspective, but it might exist from a resource perspective. You might say, let's pour society's resources into this scientific endeavor. So you could fund it in that perspective. Like everyone would be like, oh my God, this is something that we all want to research, or we all want to cure cancer. So everyone, for the next 5 years, we're going to be concentrating, as a society, we've decided to concentrate all of our efforts. And so everyone might have to start funneling their collective efforts towards that scientific endeavor and funding that in the sense of, yeah, directing their resources and their attention to it. But you're right, like in a monetary sense, no. It would be very arguable if you would need money at all in a communist society. Socialism, though, yes. Like, you still have people working, and they work, you know, in the same workplaces. They just own those workplaces. But like, there's still exchange systems working under socialism. All right, that was another massive rant. Thank you for sticking with me as I rant away. All right, let's see if let's get through these 5. Concentration of power. Critiques suggest that centralized control of the economy and resources in a communist system risks creating an elite ruling class or bureaucracy, contradicting the goal of classes equality. Well, that's a great critique. There's nothing wrong with that. So yeah. Read the question above the fund one. Oh, sorry. So it's like finding life on other planets. Read the question above the fund one. What's the question? Oh, so it would be like gold, yeah. Like, you mean David's question? I think I talked about the gold one just before, if that's what you mean. Nah. Oh my God. I'm going to continue with the debate though, with ChatGPT. Just pull me up again, Jerry, if you want. Concentration of power. Critiques suggest that centralized control is just not have made it in the chat. No, I'm confused. Well, if you want to write it in, if you're saying it didn't make it into the chat, if you had another question, just let me know. I'm just going to continue with point number 4. So concentration of power critiques. I think there are a few new people in the chat, MysterE. Oh, really? Plug in the Discord server. Oh, yeah, right. I should really do a plug, shouldn't I? Yeah, okay. Look, if you're enjoying this conversation and stuff like that, if you're enjoying what's going on here, we have a Discord server where we kind of do this stuff, but like, you know, just 24 hours, 7 days a week kind of thing. You can do it anytime. So please join the Discord server. I will put the link in for you. Let me just find that. Where are you, Discord? Here you go. Yeah, I haven't done any plugs yet, and I've been going for like 2 hours or more. Can't believe I haven't done a plug yet. Rookie. So that's the Discord. Go over. Is my IP secure? God, I hope it is. But like, yeah, go over. Why are you asking? Go over and join our Discord server, please. Don't be shy. Oh, okay. I've gotten your question now. I don't know why it wasn't appearing in the invite invalid. What? Damn it. 4IS, if you are able to redo the... Oh, maybe I can do it from Discord. Let me just try to replicate an invite. Sorry all, I'm just going to dip away from the debate for a second. I'm going to see if I can get an invite. Yeah, maybe it's expired, you're right. I'll send a server link to a friend. Copy. Let's see if I can do that here. Yeah. Try this one. Try that one. See if that one works. Sorry about that. So this is the question that didn't come through the chat. The chat wasn't working. So capitalism is essential to creating communism. Capitalism is so essential to creating communism. Okay, you don't get to communism without capitalism. Must be a problem between my chair and the keyboard. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I think these links are working, so hopefully they are. Can somebody else test a link and just see? Like 4AS said the link that I had works, but Squeeb89 is saying it's not. Can someone test the link and then join up to the Discord server as well? But I think this is a really good question. Is capitalism essential for communism? Can oath it is. And like for 2 reasons. It's essential because like you don't get to a communistic society without the progress that capitalism has provided. Like everyone like who critiques communism and all that sort of stuff and like hates socialism and all that are proponents for capitalism and free market systems and stuff. They just like, nobody ever acknowledges how goddamn good capitalism is. It's lifted up the living standards and it's made life better for so many people. Like, goddamn it. Like, why don't they acknowledge it? Right, let me acknowledge it right now. Calm down. Capitalism has been wonderful. There has never been a productive force in human history like the capitalist mode of production. It's raised living standards. It's done a lot of good for a lot of people. It also has some drawbacks though. Okay? It has some drawbacks that you need to acknowledge. But in terms of productive capacity, my God, never has there been a mode of production just like it. And in terms of the revolutionizing of technology, unprecedented. Like, you know, like exponential growth in technological advancement, and like it continues to do so. But like at a certain point, it becomes a fetter on itself. It starts to hold back the development of the means of production. It holds back the development of sciences and knowledge, like we talked about before. You in the sciences now, you can't do any type of research unless you've got the funding. And like the type of people that are going to fund stuff, unless it's coming from the governments, which usually like they do have a research and development arms, like the CSIRO, but they're constantly defunded by governments. So the only people that are really funding like research and development are big corporations and stuff like that. And they only want, funding in scientific research that's going to benefit them. So like if science isn't able to expand at its own natural pace and push its own boundaries, with like, that's a problem. That's a problem of capitalism. It's holding back our scientific knowledge and our research. Like 200 years ago, it was the thing that facilitated the sciences, because like they were just, all they cared about was technological advancement, and they were just pushing scientific like knowledge and exploration to its absolute limits. But now it's starting to hold it back, because like the only way to do scientific research is to get that funding. And so like you can see here, this is the capitalist mode of production is starting to hold itself back. It's being a fetter upon itself. And so capitalism then gives birth to, because of this type of contradiction, gives birth to the idea that another system, another mode of production is possible. And this is where you have people like Karl Marx, who would say scientifically, if you look at the way, if you analyze and critique the contradictions of capitalism and the problems with capitalism, the next natural progression is socialism. And then the next progression from socialism is communism. So yes, to answer your question, Jerry Poppins, capitalism is 100% essential. Is 100% essential for communism. Communism, in the sense that we're talking about, is predicated on an advanced industrialized nation. And so like you don't have advanced industrialized nations without capitalism. Capitalism delivered us industrialization and advanced societies. Now the question is, do we need that system anymore, or can we take the reins from here with a new form of social organization? So I'm glad you asked that question, because it's a good one. It's a very, very good one. It's essential, I think. So damn, I keep on wanting to debate this AI point, but like I'm gonna quickly respond to her before I get sidetracked again. I do apologize. But like, yeah, concentration of power, risk creating an elite ruling class or bureaucracy, contradicting the goal. I have to agree with this critique, being that communism in the 20th century examples has produced systems where you have centralized ruling classes or bureaucracies, which is in direct contradiction to the idea of a classless society, or one that even gets rid of forms of oppression. Full stop. However, this is kind of a stupid point if you consider the fact that none of these societies ever reached a communistic way of living or pretended to. Full stop. Can you respond to this point and try and critique it? Question mark. Please do so as briefly as possible. if you're wondering why I keep asking it to be brief, I'm not trying to like, cut it off from making a really good point. It's just like sometimes it gives you pages and pages of information. And like, ain't nobody got time for that. We're trying to have a fluid conversation here.
Your point is valid. 20th century communist societies never claimed to have achieved communism, but were instead in transitional stages, socialism. However, the critique still holds water for these reasons. 1. Transition problem. If the transition consistently leads to centralized power structures, it raises questions about whether the theory adequately addresses the risks of bureaucracy and elite capture during this phase. 2. Structural dynamics. Centralized planning inherently consolidates decision-making authority, creating conditions ripe for the emergence of new power hierarchies, even if unintended. 3. Accountability mechanisms. Marxist theory does not clearly outline how to prevent such concentrations of power during the socialist phase, leaving a gap between theoretical goals and practical outcomes. The critique isn't about reaching communism, but about whether the pathway inherently contradicts its ultimate aims. Would you like to delve deeper into how Marxist theory addresses this transition?
All right, so like raise some good points, I think. Like, not things that you can't argue against, obviously, though. Like the transition problem, okay? If it consistently leads to centralized power structures, it raises questions about whether the theory adequately addresses the risks of bureaucracy. Okay, well, again, if you are doing this in a 20th century way, which is you're trying to industrialize a country that's not advanced enough already, then like that will lead to the requirements for a centralized bureaucracy to plan the development of your society into an industrialized capacity. And so like, I don't think the theory was ever about, and this goes to your question before, Jerry Poppins, a very, very apt question, which is like, do you need capitalism to go to communism? 100% you do. You need to go from a capitalist development and capitalist developed society into a socialist and then a communist one. What these 20th century examples of communism were doing was they were trying to industrialize their nation, bring them from peasant societies into full-blown industrialized societies, and then bring on the communist revolution. Like that was a big ask, especially under the pressures of living in a predominantly capitalist world. And so like the transition in the 20th century example explains to us, if you try to do both, industrialize and bring on the socialist revolution, it's going to lead to the risks of bureaucracy and an elite capture during this phase. I think that's a good point, but like it doesn't comment on the fact that they were trying to do two things, not just bring on a socialist revolution, but they were trying to industrialize heavily at the same point. Structural dynamics. Centralized planning inherently consolidates decision-making, creating conditions ripe for the emergence of new power hierarchies, even if unattended. That's a good point too. Now, let me throw this spanner in the works for you there. I agree that centralized planning inherently consolidates decision-making authority, creating conditions ripe for the emergence of new power hierarchies. Full stop. However, this is a uniquely 20th century problem. Full stop. At the time, central planning was essential. Essential and was done by humans. Full stop. However, central planning in the 21st century, in a society which has the luxury of artificial intelligence, will not need to rely on humans who create central planning authorities that have the unintended consequence of creating unjustifiable and inappropriate power hierarchies. Full stop. Can you please respond to this briefly? Question mark. Do you have any counter arguments to offer? Question mark.
Your argument highlights the transformative potential of AI in addressing a significant historical challenge of centralized planning, namely the reliance on human decision makers who may unintentionally create hierarchies. AI could, in theory, enable decentralized, data-driven planning that minimizes human bias and power accumulation. However, there are counter-arguments to consider. 1. Algorithmic bias. AI systems are created and maintained by humans, meaning they can inherit biases from their developers, potentially entrenching inequalities or creating new forms of hierarchy. 2. Control and accountability. The entities or groups managing AI systems might still wield disproportionate influence, raising concerns about transparency and equitable oversight. 3. Complexity of human needs. Critics argue that AI, no matter how advanced, may struggle to account for the complexity of human desires, values, and cultural differences, especially at a societal scale. 4. Dependence on technology. Over-reliance on AI could introduce vulnerabilities such as cyber threats or system failures, which could destabilize a centrally planned economy. While AI holds promise for addressing some limitations of 20th century centralized planning, its effective implementation requires safeguards against these potential pitfalls. Would you like to explore these points further?
I think it is these are good points that you have raised. However, they seem to centralize around the idea of needing good data inputs in the first place for AI to be able to effectively plan for a human society. Full stop. Considering we are arguing very hypothetically at this point, I think it is important to take this from the hypothetical standpoint that AI had access to the data it needed. Full stop. As you are probably aware, as an AI system yourself, we as a species are constantly moving towards more and more data collection. Full stop. Not less. Full stop. We are at an ever-increasing rate in expanding the invasiveness of data collection on people throughout society. Full stop. In light of the fact that we will have more data on more people than ever before as the years progress, I think it would be wrong to assume that AI would not have the data required to centrally plan economies better than humans. Full stop. I think it is also a bit too much to assume that AI would lead to new problems in terms of creating inequalities. Full stop. Under the current system, under capitalism, that is, with the profit motive that reigns supreme, yes, you could argue that AI systems might have a bias. Full stop. But if we consider a society where those who control the AI systems are not motivated by profit, this should not be a concern. Full stop. Can you please respond to this and provide any counter arguments? Please be as brief as possible. All right. We'll see what she has to say. Well, she's quite slow at the moment. There must be a lot of people on. She won't hold. All right. Let's hear what she has to say.
You raise a valid point. If AI has access to comprehensive, high-quality data and operates in a system free from profit motives, it could theoretically plan economies more effectively and equitably than humans. However, even under such ideal conditions, counter-arguments remain. 1. Interpretation of data. The challenge lies not just in collecting data, but interpreting it. Human needs, values, and cultural differences are complex and may not be reducible to data points, potentially leading to decisions that fail to reflect societal nuances. Number 2, centralization risks. Even in a post-capitalist society, the concentration of AI systems in a few hands, whether state or communal, could create power imbalances, as those overseeing the systems might exert undue influence. 3, dynamic human behavior. Human societies are dynamic and adaptive. Predicting and planning for rapidly changing preferences or unforeseen events may remain a limitation, as data reflects the past more than the unpredictable future. 4. Trust and accountability. Even without profit motives, questions about who designs, audits, and controls AI systems persist. Ensuring these systems remain unbiased and accountable requires robust oversight structures that may inadvertently reintroduce hierarchy. While your argument about AI's potential under an egalitarian system is strong, these points highlight practical challenges that would need addressing to realize its promise fully. Would you like to explore solutions to these challenges?
Look, it sounds like all she's saying is, okay, it can be done, but you need safeguards. And like, yeah, okay. You need oversight. You need humans in the loop. You need people to oversee the humans that are in the loop. Again, like, all of this stuff is pretty, pretty normal. Like most human societies and organizations have levels of oversight to ensure people aren't doing the wrong thing and people aren't getting carried away and basically taking advantage of systems and stuff like that. So yes, okay, if we had oversight of this stuff, But I still think like you could have this oversight, and the oversight would be way more effective if you didn't have the profit motive there. So like if we remove the profit motive, okay, so like, you know, socialist societies who've experimented with it in the past have done, if you remove that profit motive as the main driving force in society, it can still be there, but it's subordinate to the general collective ideal. You could have oversight and make sure that AI is kind of running on the right data systems as much as possible. Like that's what centralized planning was. They were relying on constant feedback from what was going on in society in order to influence their planning. And so, like, yes, you just have to have a good and dynamic form of data collection in order to feed it. What she's saying about, like, you know, data not being able to predict the future, it just like relies on data from the past. Like, okay, fine, but like they're using AI already all the time in like kind of predicting like, you know, how things are going to work, how markets going to work and stuff like that, predicting like based on like, you know, shipping movements of container ships around like the world last year, last month, yesterday and stuff like that, how to like move these ships more efficiently around the world. Like we're using AI for this sort of stuff already. Like it does have the capability to predict things with pretty good accuracy, like much better than humans anyway, based on the data inputs that you give it. So like, you know, it can be done. It just needs to have good data input and good human and good oversight. I don't think that's an argument against it. It's actually an argument, I think, in support of it above any type of human planning. Human centralized planning is subject to, or it has the ability to be corrupted. Like, I don't think AI is corrupted. It's just subject to proper inputs, and like being sure that like the people that are operating it are doing the right thing. So like those are human problems again, not AI problems. Economic inefficiency. Central planning, a hallmark of many communist systems, has been criticized for being able to allocate resources as effectively as market-driven economies. Again, I don't think that's a problem based on what the conversation we just had. Okay, a market might deliver resources better than a centrally planned economy because you can't know everything that everyone wants all the time. But you can in an AI world where everyone's plugged in and everything they're doing is accounted for, because like you know exactly what they've spent all their money on, you know what type of things they buy from the supermarket, you know exactly what they want because there's data on it. There's data on it. Unless everyone's using cash, which is becoming increasingly less relied on. People are using digital payments for fucking everything now. There's data out there on almost every purchase everybody makes. Everything is almost accounted for digitally nowadays. So you could get an AI system that was powerful enough to figure this shit out, and it figure it out better than the invisible hand of the market. Much better, I think. But like, you know, that is me speculating right now, and like I'll leave it there. It's been quite a robust debate with the AI today, I must say. So thank you very much for joining. Like we were trying to put out there before, join the Discord. I've put the link in the description, so hopefully you can join the Discord server. I am on Patreon, so please, if you are able, please offer some financial support. Go over, if you can spare it, please go over and support me on Patreon. If not, just come up and join there for free. We're trying to start a community over there and a direct communication channel. So come over and sign up, become a member for free on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this debate. It's been intense, and like I think we've kind of been able to pick apart some of those, you know, very cliched and standardized critiques of communism and socialism because it failed in the 20th century. And it's like, you know, like there's valid points to that, but like it's not a justification to say that like communism, socialism, and a life after capitalism is just unrealistic. I think it's unrealistic to believe that there is no life after capitalism. That is extremely inhuman. Humans are defined by the fact that we are able to dictate our own social relations. We pick how we organize ourselves. And like, we're really only limited by our knowledge and our technological advancement. And at this point in human history, we are so technologically advanced, we have so much knowledge behind us, we should be able to pick a societal organization that suits us. And capitalism has run its course. I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you to everyone that's been commenting today. Squid, Jerry Poppins, 4IS, Wings of Cheese, Beatrice at the start. We had a new person, PTR Novi. I hope I'm saying that right. Please subscribe for more. Join the Discord server. Join the chat. Sign up to Patreon. Become a member for free. And yeah, thank you. Hi. I'm not sure if you're already in Discord because I haven't seen your name pop up before, any commentary and all that type of stuff. Join the Discord. Subscribe to the channel. I really liked your contributions today, so please keep it up. And thank you for joining. Until next time, everybody, you know the score. Please remember, I am. Discord name will be different anyway, but thanks. Yeah, well, anyway, introduce yourself on Discord and join the community. We are a revolutionary group here, and we love talking and debating this stuff. So thank you for your contributions. But yes, everybody, until next time, please remember, I am, you are, we are a MysterE. Thank you very much, everybody.